So I've officially read the entirety of DanDaDan, and I'm now keeping up with it on a weekly basis. What does that mean for you? Well, it means I've officially crammed as much information about DanDaDan, the biggest and most popular anime and manga on Earth right now, into my brain, which means I can verbally dump all of that information onto you on a somewhat weekly basis. But how do we start that verbal dump fest? Well, I can't imagine there's a better way than figuring out just how hard a couple people in this universe punchy. And yeah, I'm wearing a scrunchie on my wrist. My girlfriend left it up here and it's fun to play with. But in a world as hectic and all over the place as DanDaDan, can you simply figure out with ease how strong individual characters punchy? Well, the answer is no, you can't do it easily. Pretty much every single arc, new yokai, aliens, or transformations are introduced, and considering the fact that usually the yokais or the aliens that are introduced are eradicated in those individual arcs, it's hard to compare those to other yokai and other aliens, and therefore definitively deciding who is the strongest and who isn't in the DanDaDan universe is kind of a Herculean feat. However, overcoming Herculean feats when it comes to talking about anime is literally my job description. So today we're gonna take the first axe swing into the tree that is DanDaDan content, because today we are ranking and explaining every spirit in DanDaDan. Now, the reason that I say spirit and not yokai is because not all of the spirits in the DanDaDan universe are yokai. Some are guardian spirits, some are yokai, some are earthbound spirits, and some are tulpas. So calling them all yokai is technically inaccurate, but enough semantics because we got a lot of ghost-ish type things to explain and rank. So with no further ado, let's get directly into all the spirits in DanDaDan, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all that stuff, we talk about a brand new sponsor to the page, DoorDash. Listen, guys, I know I might look like a person who goes outside a lot, but I don't. So isn't it amazing that we can get anything that we need delivered directly to our door whenever we need it? And the best way to do that is with DoorDash, because DoorDash is your door to more. See, DoorDash wants you to know that if you want it, you can get it with DoorDash. And we're not just talking about flowers and groceries and fresh produce. I mean, yes, you can get all those things with DoorDash, but we're talking about time back with your loved ones, not having to interrupt your One Piece binge, not having to touch grass. Listen, when I am out there in the world touching grass, I have a pretty slick party move that I highly recommend you try to adopt. See, because whenever I'm at a party and I'm getting a little bit hungry and I realize other people are getting hungry or we're running out of drinks, I'll pull out my phone, pretend I'm texting, open up DoorDash, drop a pin where I'm at, and order some food and drinks to the house. You want to make friends instantly? DoorDash is going to help you do that. DoorDash is your door to more. Download the DoorDash app today to get almost anything delivered. And by using code Weeb 2024, get 50% off up to $10 on your first purchase over $15. So stay inside and save some time with DoorDash. So some of you are probably wondering, oh, Nick, if we're ranking every single spirit that appears in this 174 chapter manga, we're probably going to be ranking hundreds of spirits, right? No, there's only 10. That's it, which is convenient because usually when we do ranked and explained videos, we try to keep the list to 10 entries. Now, for a little while, I thought in some of the more recent chapters, we've been introduced to a new spirit in the form of the Pygmies, but the Pygmies are actually an alien race and not ghosts. So we're stuck at 10. But enough about all that. Let's get to our last place spot, the weakest spirits we've ever encountered in the DanDaDan universe, Hana and Taro. Hana and Taro are two atomical model dummies who have come to life for reasons we're not entirely sure of. All we know is that Hana is an atomical dummy who was thrown into the garbage, and therefore, while trying to look for Hana, Taro was introduced to Momo and Okaru. But saying that they were introduced is kind of a stretch. See, because, well, at this point, Taro was rooting through trash to try to get to Hana. He had accidentally gotten a Christmas ornament stuck to his crotch, which looked like one of Okaru's balls. And therefore, Gigi, Okaru, and Momo hunted him down, thinking that they were going to get one of Okaru's balls back, as they thought for sure the only reason that this anatomical model could run around is that it came into contact with one of Okaru's balls. But nope, it's just an anatomical model that can run around and is in love with another anatomical model with no arms and no legs. And really, so far as Hana and Taro go, that's about as much as they contribute to the story. Hana stays with Psycho and Moma, Taro comes every night to see her, and then after the Cursed House arc, Taro just kind of disappears. Now, this doesn't mean that Taro's not a semi-important character. Taro battles against the Evil Eye alongside the Dover Demon, Chiquita, and Psycho, but it's not like Taro's out there piecing up the evil eye. Every single time that Taro gets hit by something with enough force, his body explodes into a bunch of parts. And while this is technically not the worst thing of all time, because it means if he's contained or grabbed by anybody, he can simply break his body down into parts and then reassemble, it also means that he basically has next to nothing in the durability camp. However, his ability to break down into parts does come in handy, as after the evil eye is subdued for the first time, Psycho places talismans all throughout the inside of Taro's body, and then she has Taro clamp his body onto Gigi's body, because Gigi has evil eye inside of him, and therefore Gigi kind of wears Taro like a set of armor, except the set of armor is suppressing the evil eye inside of Gigi. And when it really comes down to it, that's kind of all Taro ever does. Like, yes, absolutely, you could try to make the argument that Taro has the ability to suppress the evil eye, but that more has to do with the talismans inside of Taro than Taro himself. But enough about those two characters who barely contributed to the story, because next up at number 9, we have a character that doesn't contribute to the story at all, because coming up at number 9, we have the Earthbound Crab Spirit. Now, the Earthbound Crab Spirit does have its moment in the manga, though it is the first exercise spirit, and after its exercise, it never returns in any capacity. Unlike Turbo Granny, who is the other half of the equation of the Earthbound Crab Spirit's power. Now, the Crab Spirit is a bound spirit to a tunnel in Shono City. It takes the form of a gigantic crab that has the faces of all of the girls who were murdered in the tunnel in Shono City on its back. Now, a detail that a lot of people miss is the fact that Turbo Granny went to this Earthbound Crab Spirit's tunnel, because Turbo Granny appears in places that women are killed. And thus Turbo Granny, after going to the tunnel in Shono City, comforted the crab, which was upset about all of the women that were being murdered in that tunnel. And thus it's in that moment that the Crab Spirit became incredibly protective of Turbo Granny. And because both Turbo Granny and the Crab Spirit were drawn there because of the sheer amount of women murdered in this tunnel, they slowly but surely began to fuse. However, this does not mean that they were one. This is why Momo and Okarun were able to capture Turbo Granny, and the Crab Spirit was able to chase after them. However, they did fuse into one while chasing after Okarun and Momo. But for the sake of today's video, I'm going to talk about them like they're separate spirits, because they are. Now, unfortunately, we don't get to see much from the combined forces of the Earthbound Crab Spirit and Turbo Granny, as pretty much the only thing they do after combining is hold on to a train and then get exercised. However, the Earthbound Crab Spirit by itself was able to crawl through mountains incredibly quickly, level entire highways, destroy entire bathhouses, and so on and so forth. It was an absolute destructive force of nature. So you're probably asking yourself, then Nick, why is it so low on this list? Why is it at number 9? Well, because it was exercised. With relative ease, I might add. See, it was explained to us by Psycho that spiritual power works very provincially in Japan, which is why Psycho herself says that she never wants to play away games, as her spiritual power comes from the god that she prays to in Kamigoe City. And this is further hammered home by the fact that when Psycho goes to Hokkaido to go do spiritual exorcisms up there, after borrowing the powers from the gods of Hokkaido, she has to spend 3 days praying at their shrines. And thus one of the possible explanations to explain why the Earthbound Crab Spirit seems so strong in Shono City, but got so easily exercised in Kamigoe City, is because the second that it entered Kamigoe City, it lost the majority of its power. However, it is important to note here that Okarun and Momo, with basically no grasp of their powers, were able to outpace and outsmart this crab. And exercising this crab forever only took a couple of talismans and it not being in Shono City. And I feel as though the true proof of the fact that this yokai was not nearly as powerful as other spirits we've seen in DanDaDan was the fact that Turbo Granny, who was fused with the crab at this point, survived the exorcism, but the crab didn't. However, a fun bit of information about this crab is that it most likely takes inspiration from the Haikigani, a type of crab found in Japan with a face-like pattern on its shell, which are thought to be reincarnations of warriors lost during the Battle of Dan no Ura, and therefore if they're ever caught, they're thrown back into the water out of respect for the clan that died in battle. But enough about crabs. Coming up at number 8, we got a turtle thing, because coming up at number 8 we got My Cowabunga, and boy oh boy, every time I read it do I want to say cowabunga. Now today we are specifically talking about the spirits themselves, not the spirit transformations that these spirits can undergo if they fuse with somebody else. And thus today we're not talking about Rin Sawaki's spirit transformation, but rather just My Cowabunga. Now My Cowabunga is a childhood friend of Rin Sawaki, the class president of Okarun's class. Now Mai wanted to become an idol alongside Rin. Mai was the popular one, Rin could sing. However, one day when Mai and Rin were supposed to be trying out for child idol auditions, which sounds horrific, unfortunately Rin was held up by her aging grandmother, and thus she was unable to go to the auditions, probably for the best. stop putting your children in talent competitions. But because her grandmother clearly saw that Rin was struggling with not being able to go to the audition, her grandmother told her to go. And thus Mai and Mai's mother came to Rin to come pick her up for the audition. However, prior to them getting to Rin's house, they were T-boned. And Mai and her mother died in the accident. Now, because Mai died as a child, she became what is known as an ombudsman. Now, an ombudsman yokai is usually the spirit of a deceased child. A deceased child that wasn't able to achieve the level of love that was looking for in its life. And therefore, these ombudsmen will attach to people in the real world looking for this affection. And if the person that this yokai attaches to actually nurtures and loves this spirit, there's a fair chance that this spirit will be able to move on to the next world. However, if this yokai spirit isn't taken care of and isn't loved, it will effectively act as a spiritual magnet, absorbing other spirits around it into itself and becoming so heavy that eventually it crushes the person it's bound to. And so far as Mai goes as an ombudsman, this is essentially all that she accomplishes as a yokai. Because Rin rejects Mai's death and doesn't nurture her as a yokai, Mai just gets heavier and heavier until eventually Rin can barely stand up. And it's this point that it becomes necessary for Rin to have Mai exorcised. Now, the way in which the exorcism process works is unfortunately pretty complicated. It required a gigantic cart pushed by Okarun and a bunch of men who wanted to go on a date with Psycho, Hayashi band that for some reason looks like an 80s hair band, and it required taking this massively cumbersome cart past the site of Mai's accident and to the stage where she wanted to perform with Rin. However, after Mai is exorcised by Psycho, Okarun, Momo, and the rest, she turns into a guardian spirit of Rin's. And it's at this point that she is not only no longer an ombudsman, as she now more closely resembles an Oberion, which is a piece of Japanese lore that some of you might know from Persona 4, but for those of you who don't indulge in JRPGs, is in Japanese mythical lore a child-sized monster from the Niigata prefecture that likes to ride on people piggyback style. An Oberion is very similar to what the idea of an ombudsman is in the DanDaDan universe. It's a yokai that would jump out of bushes onto the backs of travelers, screaming out Oberion, which means piggyback in Japanese. And if the traveler was good enough to allow the Oberion to travel on its back, every single step the Oberion would get heavier and heavier, until eventually it got so heavy that it crushed the traveler. On top of this, it would chew on the scalp of the traveler while the traveler carried the Oberion to their eventual death, which is why some particularly superstitious travelers in Japan's ancient times would travel with metal bowls on their heads. And in this form, Mai's guardian spirit is able to give Rin a spirit transformation. And in this spirit transformation form, Rin is able to access Mai's yokai ability, which is gravity manipulation activated by singing. But unfortunately, so far as yokai powers go, that's all that Mai can do. And while gravity manipulation is impressive, we've never really seen it used in a capacity where it was a next level talent. So as it stands, unfortunately, Mai, you get our 8th spot. But enough about that one woman musical talent. Next up, we got 6 dead musicians. Because at our number 7 spot, we have the musical portraits. Now, the music room portraits are our tulpas, and thus they aren't spirits or even yokai. Tulpas are an idea that originated from Tibetan Buddhism, a spiritual idea that if you have enough patience and perseverance, you're able to give humanoid form to a thought. And by persevering and generating your own tulpa, you can, in essence, have a spiritual servant. Now, the music room portraits fall less under the categorization of Buddhist tulpa and more under the categorization of modern pop culture tulpas, which align more closely with a cursed spirit than they do the Buddhist ideology of a tulpa. See, because the music room portraits were fear given a material body from the subconscious fear of all of the children who practice music in the music room that these portraits were in. And thus, if somebody plays music poorly at 2 a.m. in this music room, these musicians pop out of their portraits and try to kill who's ever playing that music. Now, these 6 tulpas, the 6 musicians who come out of the portraits, are, and I'm gonna have to read these, I do not have these memorized, Beethoven, Bach, Dvorak, Bernstein, Mozart, and Schubert. However, in universe, they're referred to as Von Ben, Grandma Bach, Train Spotter, Ninth, Moza, and Glasses. When it comes down to it, these 6, when working together, are some of the most powerful yokai we've seen in the DanDaDan universe. And I genuinely do believe that their strength is massively underestimated. And this is most likely a system of the fact that they're kind of used as training dummies. See, Turbo Granny takes Ira and Okarun to this music room and forces them to battle against these tulpas because she doesn't believe they're strong enough to take on the evil eye. And the high intensity of their attack volume is what forces Okarun and Ira to get strong enough to take on the evil eye. But what makes these tulpas so incredibly powerful? Well, so long as their composer, Leonard Bernstein, or Ninth, is alive, they have the ability to levitate, which allows them to put distance between themselves and any opponents that can't fly. This is important because the majority of their attacks manifest in the form of explosive musical notes. All of these musical notes, which are manifested by the tulpas playing music, launch directly at their opponents and explode upon contact with either the ground, the walls or their opponents. However, not all of the musical notes are explosive. Some of them are rest notes, and these rest notes, when they hit an opponent, force them into an immobilized state. But it doesn't end there. The tulpas also have the ability to cast massive, wide-sweeping illusions, but the illusions are physical. They can basically change the environment in which they're fighting, something that they do with their Symphony No. 6 Pastoral, a technique that changes the music room that they were fighting in into a giant paddy field. And as a paddy field, that is to say a rice paddy field, is muddy and filled with water, it increases the advantage of those who are floating in the air because those who are on the ground have a hard time running through a rice paddy. And considering the fact that those running through a rice paddy are actively trying to avoid a bombardment from explosive musical note and paralyzing rest notes, this is a insanely massive advantage. But in the hypothetical situation where the conductor is taken out and all the rest of the musicians have lost the ability to levitate, which switches the location from a rice field to a gigantic opera house. And inside this opera house is not only an army of people trying to take out whoever the musicians are fighting, but also 4 gargantuan giants that protect the musicians while they play from a distance. So when it comes down to it, these yokai have an insane amount of options. And if it weren't for Okarun awakening to the powers of Turbo Granny and also having Ira by his side, who at that point was one of the more powerful yokai transformations, I don't know if they would have made it out of this music lesson. But enough about those dead old guys, let's talk about dead kids. Because coming up at number 6, we got Umbrella Boy, also known as Futazuma. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but don't name your kid Futa. Futazuma was, and heavy on the was here, the younger brother of Unji Zuma. However, after growing up in a life of poverty, where everything that Futa was ever given was a hand-me-down from Unji, one day Unji and Futa's mother was able to get enough money to buy Futa a pair of rain boots and an umbrella. And Futa was so excited about having something of his own for the first time that he said he would take these rain boots and umbrella with him everywhere he went, even if it wasn't raining. However, one day, unfortunately, during a windy day, Futa's umbrella was blown out of his hand into a nearby river. Futa, not wanting to lose his treasured umbrella, dove into the river, but unfortunately drowned. And after his death, became known as the yokai Umbrella Boy. Now, Umbrella Boy is based off a Kasa Obake, which is an umbrella yokai that originated in Japan during the Muromachi period. However, it wasn't really until the Taisho period, which started in 1912 in Japan. Now, unfortunately, people can't necessarily agree as to whether or not a Kasa Obake is a yokai or a Sakumogami. Now, a Sakumogami in Japan is an everyday item that is well loved over its duration as a household item and therefore eventually gains a soul. It's the entire plot of Gachiakuda. But really, all that matters is that Umbrella Boy is based off of Kasa Obake. Now, Umbrella Boy first manifests to Unji a couple of years later at the site of Futa's drowning when Officer Bega, who's essentially Unji's adoptive father, jumps in the same river that killed his younger brother to save a little boy who is also drowning in the same river. And it's at this point that Umbrella Boy presents itself to Unji and says, if you want to save them, take my power. Now, it's hard to say exactly how Umbrella Boy was able to use its abilities and not tie it to Unji, because we don't see a lot of Umbrella Boy separate from Unji. However, Unji with the power of Umbrella Boy is able to do a heck of a whole lot. See, whether it's propelling himself into the air and controlling his flight by opening and closing his umbrella, or by opening his umbrella and hitting a switch and firing off a shockwave that destroys anything in its path, the Umbrella Boy yokai seems to grant Unji an incredible amount of strength. An incredible amount of strength that Unji uses for good. And this kind of makes sense. And it also makes sense that we don't see much of Umbrella Boy prior to him joining up with Unji, not just because Unji is a arc-specific character, but also because the Umbrella yokai is often referred to as a sweet yokai, implying that if it was going to use its powers for anything, it would probably be for good. And honestly, considering just what we've seen Unji do with Umbrella Boy's powers, be it blowing away manifested knights that are 100 feet tall in one fell umbrella opening, zipping through the air at some of the highest speeds we've ever seen in the manga, or just blocking attacks with the opening of an umbrella that otherwise would have been fatal, and pretty much everything about the Umbrella Boy yokai proves to be stronger than any of the other yokai we've listed up until this point. But this yokai does have a weakness, at least when it comes down to spirit transformations, and that is that the usage of this yokai's ability is incredibly taxing and therefore very limited. But this is not at all a problem that our number 5 entry has, because coming up at number 5, we have Acrobatic Silky. See, Acrobatic Silky's backstory is genuinely the backstory that got me hooked in DanDaDan. It's not until you get to Acrobatic Silky that you truly begin to realize that this is a very good manga. Acrobatic Silky, like most yokai, was at one point a woman. Well, at one point was a human. She just happened to be a human woman. Actually, now that we're talking about it, a lot of the yokai are ladies. Anyways, while Acrobatic Silky was alive, she was a mother, and a hard-worked one at that. And I'm not gonna get super into her backstory because the anime is literally just about to cover it, but eventually certain events in Acrobatic Silky's life that revolve around her daughter force her to take her own life out of despair. And after her death, she comes back as the yokai Acrobatic Silky. Now, one day, Ira Shiratori, who's who's always been semi-sensitive to spirits, came up to her after seeing her and mistook her as her mother. And this moment was so incredibly healing to Acrobatic Silky, who lost the memories of her previous life, but could remember that she was missing something, presumably a daughter figure, that she spent the next 10 years of her life stalking Aira, waiting for the day that Aira be able to see her again and call her mother. When it comes down to it, Acrobatic Silky's abilities are rather simple. She has hair manipulation. Every single strand of hair that Acrobatic Silky has, she's able to manipulate. Whether she's using that hair to swing around terrain like she's Spider-Man, or grab onto people and slam them into walls, she's essentially like Doc Ock if instead of 8 legs, he had thousands. But it's not just the ability to manipulate her hair that makes her so incredibly powerful. See, yes, the silky part of the Acro Silky comes from her silky hair, but the acro, as in acrobatic silky part, comes from her dancing background. As Acrobatic Silky is one of the most agile yokai we've ever seen in DanDaDan, with the ability to keep up with and dodge attacks from a transformed Okarun who's moving at 100 kilometers an hour, just an overall flexibility that makes her almost impossible to hit in combat. On top of this, she's shown the strength to be able to recover from a full strength kick from Okarun, the strength to snap herself out of Momo's psychic restraints, and so much more. On top of this, as a spirit transformation for Aira, there's essentially no limit on how long Aira can be transformed. So long as she doesn't take too much damage that she's knocked out of her transformation, Aira can be Acro Silky for as long as necessary. She doesn't have a too full out limit like Okarun or Unji, meaning in terms of stamina and control, out of all of the spirit transformations, she probably has the best. Ties into the fact that during the Evil Eye arc, it was established that Aira in her Acro Silky transformation was as fast as the Evil Eye, and it kind of puts into perspective that Acro Silky was never a yokai to mess around with. And this is very much hammered home by the fact, and spoilers ahead here for those of you who are anime only, that really the only reason that Acro Silky even loses in the battle against Okarun and Momo is the fact that she gives up her life force for Aira as one last act of motherly love towards her presumed daughter. But the only reason that Acro Silky was in the position to do this in the first place, because Turbo Granny as a Monarchy Neko used all the luck that she had to make sure that Acro Silky would lose in the battle against Okarun and Momo. And when you start putting Turbo Granny into the equation, we gotta talk about how powerful the yokai being wiped out are. But enough about all these adults who turned into yokais, let's get back to the dead kids. Because coming up next in our number 4 spot is the Evil Eye, also known as the Lost Otsutsuki. The Evil Eye is a yokai who spent years attached to a sacrificial house. See, when he was alive, the Evil Eye was a young boy who was chosen by the Kito family to be sacrificed to the local yokai, all in order to make sure that that yokai was able to stop the eruption of the local volcano that would destroy the village the boy lived in. However, while the boy was imprisoned, waiting to be sacrificed, he one day saw the children of the village playing together, and he wished for more than anything to be able to play along with them. However, he never gets that chance, and he soon passes away from malnourishment. Several years later, the boy who dies remanifests as a yokai in the place that he had died, which now has a house built on top of it. And inside this house is a family who have a young son who sees the yokai, and this yokai, hoping to play with this boy, begins to dance, which terrifies the young son. However, eventually, this new generation family is also chosen to be sacrificed in order to make sure that the volcano does not erupt. And unfortunately, the Evil Eye isn't able to stop the boy from being sacrificed like himself because he doesn't have a physical body, which makes the Evil Eye grow an incredible hatred towards all of humanity. Now, the Evil Eye is obviously loosely based off the Evil Eye from European mythology. The idea that somebody can impart the wretchedness of life onto you with a malevolent stare, which is why people often will wear Evil Eye amulets, which is supposed to protect people from said stares. And that's exactly how the powers of the Evil Eye work. See, as a yokai, the Evil Eye's abilities are vastly different from its abilities as Gigi's spirit transformation. Because really, when it boils down to it, the only thing that the Evil Eye can do as a yokai is that if it makes eye contact with somebody, it can forcibly commit them to commit suicide. Now, technically, on top of cursing humans with its gaze, it's also able to swap memories with the human that it makes eye contact with, which is how we were able to get the exposition on what the Evil Eye's past looked like in the first place, as it swapped the memories of its history with Gigi. But as a spirit transformation, the Evil Eye has basically everything but the ability to curse humans into killing themselves. Like its ability Cursed House, which makes a house-shaped force field around it that stops all incoming spiritual and physical attacks. However, the Evil Eye can also use it to imprison his enemies inside the cursed house with him, making sure that nobody or nothing is able to get between him and his foe. On top of this, the Evil Eye in Gigi's body is able to generate something known as a grudge ball, which is essentially a soccer ball made out of spiritual energy that Gigi is able to punch or kick around that destroys anything it comes into contact with. And as Gigi is an incredibly good soccer player, he's very cognizant of where the grudge ball is at all times, and therefore he essentially fights in conjunction with the grudge ball, having it bounce around while he attacks somebody with his body. On top of this, the grudge ball has a homing effect, meaning so long as Gigi gets it bouncing, bouncing and keeps his opponent too busy to keep track of it, eventually it will smoke them. Now, the Evil Eye multiple times is able to run fades with the entirety of the Okarun gang, taking on fights as disadvantageous as the Evil Eye versus Aira, Okarun, Momo, Psycho, and Manjiro simultaneously. That's 3 spirit transformations, the strongest shrine maiden in all of Japan, and Manjiro, the bootuber. And while yes, at any point Psycho probably could have exercised the Evil Eye and freed Gigi, because Gigi didn't want to kill the Evil Eye, unfortunately, it came down to hands. And Okarun and the rest of the team were getting their butt kicked so heartedly that Okarun had to go on an entire training arc battling against the musical room Tulpas just to get strong enough to beat down the Evil Eye and convince them that they're gonna fight once a week. However, without goading the essentially child Evil Eye into this agreement, it was loosely implied that if the Evil Eye was able to control Gigi's body and continue get stronger, there'd be nothing anybody could do about him. And thus, max potential Evil Eye Gigi could possibly be one of the strongest people in the DanDaDan universe. However, fortunately, he was a child who was starved of friends, and Okarun understood that sentiment. But enough about the Evil Eye and Gigi, because coming up at number 3, we got Turbo Granny.
Nick, how can you put Turbo Granny at number 3 when you put the crab at number 9?
You know what? Honestly, fair-ish point, but everything we've learned about Turbo Granny makes her seem a lot more powerful than just a woman who can run around 60 miles an hour. See, it was very much established by Psycho, like I said, probably the strongest shrine maiden in all of Japan, that even she couldn't wander into the tunnel that Turbo Granny was inhabiting. And while this at least partially had to do with the Earthbound crab spirit, Psycho Ayase, agreed upon to be one of the strongest characters in the DanDaDan universe, thought that Turbo Granny was off limits for even her. And that makes sense, because basically everything we've ever learned about Turbo Granny makes her sound to be one of the most terrifying yokai in all of Japan. See, Turbo Granny in real-world Japan is actually one of the more recent yokai. In fact, she's less considered a yokai and more nowadays just considered a modern-day folktale. A story told around Japan to this day about an old woman who's seen running roughly the speed of a car. 100 kilometers an hour, also known as 62.1 miles per hour. And she uses this immense speed to challenge anybody that she can to a race. Now, for Okarun, that curse manifested as him losing his manhood, but it's not implied that that has to be the curse every single time. Turbo Granny taking Okarun's manhood could just be a system of the fact that she hated men because men were killing all the women in her tunnel, and thus her stripping a man of his manhood, the thing that inevitably motivated a bunch of men to kill a bunch of women in her tunnel, could have been symbolic. But outside of Turbo Granny's immense speed, she has a plethora of other abilities. See, for those of you who are anime only, you'll know that Turbo Granny has the ability to jump through phones. However, you won't necessarily know why. See, while Turbo Granny does have the ability to run at 100 kilometers an hour, she also has an innate understanding of how the DanDaDan world works and how spirals are key in that understanding. As to say that Turbo Granny understands that electrical currents, in some capacity that is incredibly simplified, travel in spirals. And therefore, Turbo Granny is able to spiralize her body and travel through electrical wires at insanely high speeds, presumably the speed of electricity. And because of this, Turbo Granny is able to teleport to anywhere in Japan that has an electrical wire or an appliance like a cell phone, which is how she was able to teleport directly onto the Serpo's spaceship. On top of this, Turbo Granny has the ability to dematerialize her physical form, which is probably what she uses to hop into electrical currents. But she can also use this ability to possess people, like she did with Okarun or the Earthbound crab spirit. Though how she was able to take over Okarun's body technically had nothing to do with her dematerializing. And this doesn't necessarily mean that Turbo Granny was inside of Okarun. Turbo Granny, while possessing Okarun prior to being exercised, still had her physical body in the tunnel, but she was able to, from a distance, take control of Okarun's body and throw him into a homicidal rage. On top of this, Turbo Granny's curse is contagious, as she's able to curse anybody who spends enough time around the person she cursed, which is how she was able to threaten the death of either Psycho or Momo. Mind you, two incredibly spiritually active people who should have defenses against that kind of thing. On top of this, after Turbo Granny fuses with the Earthbound crab spirit, which is to say that Turbo Granny, in a sense, gained complete and total dominion over Shono City, which is how she was able to turn the tunnel walls of the Shono City tunnel into hands that grabbed Momo, how she was able to rise all the spirits of the Shono City graveyard and have those spirits take over the residents of Shono City to chase after Momo and Okarun, and so much more. Basically, within the confines of Shono City, Turbo Granny and the Earthbound crab spirit were invincible. But even after Turbo Granny was exercised and had her abilities stolen from her by Okarun and Momo, as a Monokineko, she has a luck inducement ability, which allows her to grant luck upon those who she identifies as on her side. At least, however, that's what she claims. But it's revealed over the course of the manga that this luck inducement is incredibly arbitrary. It can not only affect her allies, but also her enemies, and it happens completely without her control. But still, even as a yokai stripped of her powers, she still has powers, which is probably why Okarun has such a capacity for getting stronger, because he has the powers of one of the most powerful yokai in DanDaDan. But she's only in third place because coming up at number 2, we have the Fairy Tale card. The Fairy Tale Yokai is the most recent yokai we have seen in DanDaDan. It is an incredibly powerful yokai that was sealed within the Danmara, but still retained so much power even while sealed that it made the entirety of the inner world of the Cursed Trunk, specifically to resemble an RPG, hoping that somebody would be dropped into it and defeat it. And so far as yokai that are defeatable go, the Fairy Tale card is pretty much as strong as it gets. See, the Fairy Tale card has gone up against basically every major character in this story, Count Saint Germain included, and still almost won. See, because the Fairy Tale card went up against an army of delinquents, Count Saint Germain, Officer Bega, Unji, Rin, Okaroon, Momo, and still almost escaped. The only people that weren't there were Vamala and Gigi. But how? How is it so incredibly powerful? Well, outside of the fact that it generated an entire pocket dimension while sealed, a pocket dimension that, mind you, is so incredibly vast that one guy lived in it for like 30 years, the Fairy Tale card is comprised of 4 cards. The face card, the eye card, the ear card, and the mouth card. With the mouth, eye, and ear cards, the Fairy Tale card is able to rob somebody of either their mouth, eyes, or ears. But it goes about these 3 things in very different ways. See, the Fairy Tale card, if it activates its eyes or mouth card, simply strips whoever it's trying to affect of their eyes and or mouth. And therefore, if you're somebody like Rin, whose abilities manifest from their ability to sing, the Fairy Tale card is simply able to take your mouth from you and make sure that your abilities no longer work. And if you're somebody who relies on sight, so, I don't know, 99.9% of people, it is also able to strip your eyes from you. But it doesn't take your ears from you. No. It uses your ears against you. See, the Fairy Tale card is able to release an incredibly potent sound that's so incredibly loud that not only does it knock out the hearing of everybody who hears it, but it also disorients them and makes them dizzy. But those are just its body part cards. The Fairy Tale card's most powerful card is its mind control card, a technique that allows it to either take over the body of somebody or mentally break them. See, because by using this card, the Fairy Tale card is either able to make somebody relive their most traumatizing memories, or is able to take over their body, forcing their body to live up to its highest level of potential. However, if that level of potential is far beyond the level of potential that that person has already achieved by themselves, the repeated stress of living up to that potential can be enough to kill them. On top of this, there appears to be literally no limits on how many humans the Fairy Tale card can control simultaneously. And the only way to get your mouth back, or your ears fixed, or your eyes back, or your body back is to destroy the cards that the Fairy Tale cards are currently using. But those cards can be regenerated almost instantaneously. And the only way to defeat the Fairy Tale cards is to destroy all 4 of its cards simultaneously. Something that even Count Saint Germain, undoubtedly the strongest person in the DanDaDan universe, was unable to do by himself. So yes, the Fairy Tale cards are very deserving of our number 2 spot.
But if Nick, the Fairy Tale card's number 2, who's number 1?
Reiko Kashima. And it's not close. Reiko Kashima, also known as the slit-mouthed woman, is by far and away not only the strongest yokai we've ever seen in DanDaDan, but just the strongest anything. Any strongest ranked and explained video we do for DanDaDan will have Reiko Kashima at the top. Now, Reiko is a weird amalgamation of a bunch of different yokais in Japan. She's a combination of a Kuchisaki Onna, a Teketeke, and Bloody Mary. A Kuchisaki Onna is actually one of the Shinigami that Geto used in the battle against Toji. It's a relatively new folklore yokai from Japan, which is based off the idea of a woman who prompts you to tell her how beautiful she is, and if you don't, she either kills you or scars you to look exactly like her. And considering the fact that Reiko is incredibly obsessed with her appearance and gets incredibly angry at anybody who doesn't call her beautiful, this seems like the most apt comparison. But there's also the aspect that Reiko has control over mirrors, and you're able to get rid of her if you say pomade 10 times. And as Bloody Mary is a murderous woman who appears in mirrors if you say her name a couple of times, that also feels like an apt comparison. Abilities-wise, Reiko has proven herself time and time again to be the most powerful yokai in DanDaDan. She has complete and total control over the mirror that she carries around with her at all times, which allow her to do things like Leorio's remote punching, where Reiko is able to punch through her mirror and launch her hands out of glass shards or mirror shards anywhere else on Earth. Basically, if anything has a reflection, Reiko is able to attack through it. Because of this, Reiko is able to attack from any distance. She can see and react through any reflective surface on Earth, as we've seen that Reiko has been able to manifest attacks from a city away. On top of this, anything reflected in Reiko's mirror can immediately be swapped into her mirror dimension, a pocket dimension that she controls like a god. And there is literally no way anybody inside or outside of the mirror can free somebody trapped in the mirror dimension. And when she did this to Momo and Vomalo, we were like, oh wow, what a cool ability. That's kind of powerful. But when she did it to tens of thousands of spaceships simultaneously, we were like, oh, she's a god. On top of this, she's able to possess anybody who looks at their own reflection in a mirror and is able to peer in on anybody who is currently being reflected by anything. On top of this, if she's hunting you down, she's able to perfectly replicate the voice of anybody that she wants you to think that she is. So yeah, she's very powerful. In fact, she's so powerful that Psycho said there's not an entity on Earth that's able to take out Reiko. Especially now when you consider the fact that Momo has already said pomade to her 10 times, which means to get rid of her now, you need to say pomade 100 times, which is almost impossible when you consider how powerful she is. So yeah, for the sheer fact that she was able to wipe out an entire ultra-futuristic army with one fell swoop of her mirror grab and a couple of big punchies, we're gonna have to say she's number 1 on the list. And with that, we've completed our first DanDaDan ranked and explained video. I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you agree with my ranking? Who would you have moved and why? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Next up, aliens?